I'm sitting here with Joe Rabinowitz on October 29th, 2008 in מעלה, Adumim. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your family growing up, where you grew up, when?
All right. I grew up in Chicago. My grandmother was born in Chicago. My great-grandfather lost property in the Chicago fire in 1871. Both of my parents were born in Chicago. I was raised in a very Orthodox, Zionistic house with a deep love for Israel.
How was that expressed, the love for Israel? Did your parents talk about it, or?
In process of conversation, especially in Shabbos, from sitting at the table, there were things that were discussed. I had good religious training. I went to Cheder, I went to the yeshiva for a while, and it left a deep impression on me.
Do you remember people coming from Israel or anything of that sort when you were younger?
There weren't that many people in Chicago from Israel, and I can't honestly say that it had an influence, although my wife's grandparents, my wife's grandmother, and her entire family were born in Hebron. But it didn't enter into it, because don't forget, I got married many years after I was a mechalnik.
And tell me a little bit about life growing up, about school, about your family.
As far as family, there were three of us. My sister should have a lichtig Gan Eden. My brother and I. My brother went on to become a rabbi, and he was also a chaplain during the Korean War.
Older or younger?
Younger than I am. I left the yeshiva and volunteered to go in the American Army. I was overseas in Europe.
What year was this?
I went into the American Army July 12th, 1945, and I was discharged December 12th, 1946. I left for Europe with the American Army in February of 46 and came back in November of 46 to the States.
You drafted or you enlisted?
No, I enlisted. As I said, I left the yeshiva and went in. I had 17 weeks of infantry basic training. When I went overseas, they put me in the quartermaster corps. And that's where I remained until I came back. They did offer me, I spoke a perfect Platt Deutsch. I picked it up because of my command of the Jewish language. And they begged me to go with the outfit into Germany, and I would have received a commission. The only problem there was I'd have to stay overseas an additional 18 months. And I found out rather early that the Army was just not my cup of tea. So I came back to the States.
Where were you stationed?
In Reims, France. I did manage to get into Paris on Army business a couple times. Should I tell a little joke that happened? I wanted a kosher meal, and they had a restaurant in Paris for the DPs, which were the displaced persons that were unfortunately went through the hells of Europe. And they saw me in a uniform, and one gentleman came over to me and he said, this all went on in Yiddish because I couldn't speak French. And he said, you know what you should do? He said, why don't you make a conditional kedushin with some of these girls, so that they're able to get to the United States, and as soon as they hit the USA land, then the kedushin will be null and void. I said, no, Rabbi, I don't do things like that.
Did you know at this point or before, did you know about what had happened with the Holocaust? Were you?
We were very well attuned to what was going on in Europe. As a matter of fact, there were many gatherings in Chicago to keep us apprised of what was going on. There were also tefillahs that were said for the Jews in the concentration camps. So yes, we were very well aware of what was going on.
Your decision to enlist in the army, was it what motivated you to leave the yeshiva to go?
Two things really. I didn't have what they call in Yiddish Sitzfleisch to sit and learn. Number two, I realized my relatives in Europe were in big trouble and maybe I could help. So I went.
And then when you finished, you were discharged from
the American Army. I tried to take advantage of the GI Bill of Rights, which entitled me to go to college. I also had a scholarship that I had been awarded, the Cook Fund Scholarship. My family was in dire financial straits. I did start to go to college, and I needed surgery done. I had a pineal cyst, or whatever they call that, and I dropped out of school because the pain was severe. I had to have the surgery done, and then I never went back to college. I went to a trade school instead.
This is in Chicago?
This was in Chicago, and I studied electronics. And that was the type of work that I did here in Israel at that time.
So at this point, it's now late 1946, it's 1947, correct? This was in 47 that I had the surgery, yes. And, no, I'm sorry, in 47 I had the surgery, and started trade school, started to go to the trade school, and by the time I was taken as a mechanic, I had graduated the trade school. So I had a very, very good knowledge of electronics. So how did this come about? Were you following the events that were taking place in Palestine at the time? I followed it very closely. They came out for a request for volunteers for the tzabah. I went down and they interviewed me, This was in March of 48.
How'd you hear about this? It was advertised or word of mouth?
That I don't remember. I think it was more word of mouth than advertised. And I was interviewed. We went through, because all of us had to go through a battery of psychological, not a psychological test per se, but certainly to be questioned by somebody that was a psychologist. It was, I don't know what their thinking was, I guess. And I was accepted. I was accepted in March of 48.
Do you have friends who were doing this as well?
There was one other friend of mine, yes, that did it, only because I did it, and he went along with me. There was there were a lot of people that were taken from the East Coast and going to France, and the United States State Department said, hey, there are too many Kohns, Goldsteins, and Goldbergs going to France from the East Coast, and that's when they started to take from the Midwest and the West Coast. As a matter of fact, one of the fellows that went over with us got killed on a half-track in the Negev. And they didn't take us until approximately the beginning of October of 48. And I was stationed at Toldos, which...
In March of 48, you said you were accepted.
Oh, yes.
But then you stayed in Chicago.
Oh, yes, I continued schooling. Yes.
Eric, to ask something inside. Can you describe the atmosphere in the States in the end of 47 about the option that will be a country for us? What you hear from people around you, Jewish or not Jewish?
I will express the Jewish opinions. There was a great deal of anxiety that the state will become, and everybody was hoping that things would go well.
And about the policy of the states against Britain?
Well, of course, Truman was advised, and rightfully so, to be pro the formation of the State of Israel, and he came out openly for it. The UN, of course, came out for partition.
Do you remember the vote? Do you remember November 29th when the...
I don't remember the date, but I remember that they came out for the partitioning of Palestine to create a state for the Jews. And the state, the name for the state was not given in the UN Charter. I think it was Ben Gurion that decided it should be called Israel. But I remember it well, yes.
And so you were still in Chicago when the state was declared?
Oh, yes.
And war broke out, and you were just, what were you feeling? Were you feeling,
I wanted to go help. By the way, the 5 days in Iyar when the state was declared, that's also my Hebrew birthday.
Yeah. So you were anxious to get
Anxious to help, sure.
Okay, and then,
I mean, you have to remember, I did have 17 weeks of infantry basic training, and when you're young, you're not too smart, and you're ready to go and do whatever you have to do, even if you have to crawl on the ground with a rifle. It doesn't.
what did your parents think of this decision?
I can only say this. They didn't say no.
Now, here you had just been over in Europe during World War II, and now you were looking to re-enlist in potential combat situations.
I made a comment to my mother, may she rest in peace. I said, "Ma, don't forget, if I don't come back, it's for our cause." She gave me a look, but she couldn't say no. She was very Zionistic, very.
And then the time finally came, and they said, "You're gonna."
Yeah, they took us.
How did you get there?
We were flown from Chicago to New York, and in New York we went on the. We were taken by the New Amsterdam, which was a ship, a Dutch ship. There were, I don't know how many of us, but there had to be close to 20 of us. And when we got to the Havre, we were supposed to look for someone that had an armband on Mishtara. We found them, and they took us immediately to Marseille. Those that were not Dati, as far as we know, were flown out the next day. Those that were Dati were put into a camp with the North African Moroccan Jews, French Moroccan Jews, who also, they were escaping from Morocco because France at that time had given Morocco its independence, and these Jews decided, since they still maintained French citizenship, they came to France and went to Marseille. We were in that camp for 3 weeks. At 1 o'clock in the morning, we were loaded on board ship. The 6 of us that were Dati, and there were approximately 460 French Moroccan Jews that were on that ship. It's a shame to call it a ship. It was a converted Italian fishing boat, and what they did, they made levels down below where the fish were thrown out of wood, so that there were about 4 decks created below deck. We slept on that. It took us 11 days to go from Marseille to Haifa. The ship was given a name called Yardania. The Italian crew were not that well versed in international travel. At that time, there was a large influx of communists into Greece, and the Greek Navy was out in force to protect its shores and to keep the communists out. Here we are on this ship, which, by the way, broke down at one point in time, and we were just left stranded for a while until they finally got the engines going. They didn't have a radio, and the only thing they had were signal flags. They put up the wrong signal flags, and there is nothing that is more harassing than a large battleship, which was what Greek ship was, circling our little tiny ship. All they had to do practically was spit, and we would have gone down. They finally put up the right flag, and the ship went its way. And then we got into Haifa, and the UN was there in force because nobody was supposed to be permitted of military age on shore. And there was an enclave of some people there that kind of occupied the UN, and we disembarked. We were sent to Benyamina, and in Benyamina we were dispersed. The French Moroccan Jews were sent to Beersheba, and we were dispersed.
Do you remember your feeling when you first disembarked, reaching Israel for the first time?
No, I can't say I do. I was more interested in getting myself situated and doing my part than I was. No, that didn't enter.
So what happened? What happened next? Where'd they send you to?
I was sent for an interview, and this upset me to a degree because the first question out of the interviewer was, Dati? And of course my answer was yes, and then what my qualifications were. And they were torn between sending me to a frontline repair station or sending me to Tolldot. And Tolldot was the central radio station for all of the ground troops. Would you want me to describe a little bit of the, okay. The area was the end of a camel caravan path. And believe it or not, even at that time, there was still trade going on with Jordan by camel caravan. And number two, there was nothing but forest between Tolldot and Petah Tikva. That was all forest land at that time. This is also historic. The Grand Muftis told the Arabs to leave, and as soon as the Jews are driven into the Mediterranean, they'll be able to come back and take whatever the Jews left over and get their own also back. Thank God this did not happen, and the Arab that left, that Pardes, he must have been an extremely wealthy Arab. It was an extremely large Pardes. It had a very large home, and it also had a servant's quarters, which is where we slept. In fact, we used to pick oranges right off the trees. Those Jaffa oranges are good. The station itself, from the distance, you couldn't tell what was going on. It was like a hut made out of mud or whatever have you, fully equipped. There were 4 or 5 U.S. Navy transmitters there. There was a Helicrafter regular radio and some lights, and that was our full accommodations. And we did have a phone.
How many were you?
There were 2 of us per shift. There was a maximum total of 6. Yeah.
What was your responsibility?
My responsibility was to maintain the equipment, to honor the requests from the field. For example, if by chance some of the signal was intercepted because it was all Morse code, or they wanted to change frequency, and that was part of my job. But on the other hand, we had to be very careful. Although it wasn't too hard to tell who was requesting this because this was all done by telephone, and you could tell that it was people that were in the Jewish Brigade at one time by the accent. There was no question, but I still required verification of changing of frequency.
So you were communicating with people that were out in the field?
No. The only communications I had with them was by telephone if they needed anything done. But other than that, I had no communications with the field. No.
So you were using your training from Chicago?
From the States, yes.
States
Yes. And also part of our job was to install walkie-talkies on Piper Cubs. The Piper Cubs were used to drop bombs out of the windows on enemy territory. As a matter of fact, there was a case, the Egyptian Navy was off the coast of Tel Aviv, and I put a walkie-talkie on one of the Piper Cubs, and instead of going down into a miklat, which I should have done, but you're more interested in making sure everything goes right, and I had bitachon that it would. I stood up on a hill and watched this, and the Piper Cub, as soon as it started to fly over, and the Egyptian Navy could have decimated Tel Aviv. I mean, they were there in force, there was no question. They scattered. I'll never forget that as long as I live. Yeah.
So how long were you in State Ove?
I was State Ove from October until the last truce, which is when I requested to stay, and again, because they needed electronics and I was willing to stay. This was around just before Pesach of 49. So let's say somewhere around April. And they offered me, and again, we have to remember that they were still on the British pound sterling. They offered me £1.50 a day. Sola Bonnet was getting £2.20 a day and could barely exist. And what would I do on £1.50 a day? And I had no family here. And £1.50, a pound was at that time $3. So I went to come back.
So you were discharged from what you were considered part of the army?
Yeah. In fact, my Teudat Shichrur reads, yeah.
Okay. And you were discharged then in April of 1949?
Yeah, April 49.
And then you went back to Chicago?
Yes. And I continued my education. And then I went to work. I did TV service work, and then from there into design and calibration of test equipment. And I was plant manager for a company. I did design analysis on the Titan missile. And then from there just finished out my working career in quality control for the United States government.
Did you, after this, did you think about coming back to Israel?
Well, the family would like to have me make Aliyah.
I'm saying even, in the period after, like in the years after you were a Machamech.
I have some things that I must take care of. It's not out of the picture. The chances are, I think, quite good of making Aliyah or completing my process. Yes. My daughter and I have gone to visit several retirement homes, and one of them seems to strike my fancy and hers also. So we'll see. Unfortunately, I lost my wife in 2006. So, what can I tell you?
Reflecting back now, 60 years later, what impact do you think the decision to be a volunteer and be a part of the founding and the building of the state, what effect did that have on the rest of your life, or on, maybe the way messages or you wanted to impart to your children because of that?
Well, I think I have living proof. My daughter made Aliyah many years ago. I can't honestly say that it controlled any part of my life, but it was certainly open discussion in our at the dinner table and among the children. It left an impact on them.
How about an impact on you?
I'm proud of what I did. I would have done it again. We Jews cannot forsake one another. There has to be achdus, which there is not here now. There has to be respect for one another, which I don't believe there is right now. I was taken on a tour of the Har HaBayis and was hurt deeply. Raised my blood pressure. The fact that all of the signs on the Har HaBayis are in Arabic on what I consider my holy grounds. I don't know.
I want to ask you, please, when you came in 48, what was the relationship between you, the people who came from Machal, and the Sabras? How they, what was the,
I know what you're trying to ask. There was, as far as I was concerned, there was a fairly decent relationship. They realized what our position was, and we realized that they needed our help. And I thought it was good, yeah.
Did you feel appreciated for what you were doing, for volunteering?
I can't say. I really don't know what to answer that. I can't honestly say that I saw anybody throw their arms around me, so to speak, and thank you for coming. But I think deep down inside there was some feelings.
Did you care, or that wasn't, or was that not what you were looking for?
That I could care less. I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew that was every Jew's duty to make sure that this state existed. We had an affair for the mechanics in Boca Raton, Florida, and some woman came over and said, "Oh, you guys are to be commended for what you did." I said, "No, honey." I said, "That was every Jew's job." And it was.
Did you was aware of the situation that there is Etzel, Lehi, and Agana? It's not. It's one. We are one.
First of all, if you want to ask me if I knew what Menachem Begin was doing, yes, I knew only too well. If you want to tell me what the Stern Group was doing, I knew only too well.
Before you came, or once?
Oh, long before I came. Long before I came. If you want to ask me whether Mapai and Mapam turned in yes, I was very well aware that they turned in their own Jews to the British. Yes, I was very well aware of that. And let's leave it at that.
I wanted to ask you about any influences when you were younger that connected you to Palestine or Zionism or Israel.
Well, I can't say that it was actually anything that caused me to have a greater attraction for the state, but my grandfather, Olav Shalom, made Aliyah in about 1927, 26 or 27, and from Chicago. He was born in Poland. He made Aliyah. He married an Israeli gal from Jerusalem, had 2 children with her, and in 1934 came back to the United States. As a matter of fact, his daughter, made Aliyah with all except one child who was still in Chicago or still in the States, and she moved to Karnei Shomron with her husband. She passed away approximately the same time my wife did, and her husband and a daughter are still living in Karnei Shomron, and they have 3 other children that are living dispersed throughout Israel. And my wife and I, in the late 80s, went down to the Aliyah office. We were going to make Aliyah, and unfortunately, my wife became quite ill and couldn't do it, couldn't make Aliyah.
the experiences that you had throughout and your volunteering, did it impact the way you related to Israel in subsequent years, and how you followed what was going on in Israel?
I followed everything quite well, and as a matter of fact, I was in 1967 when Kvush Yerushalayim took place. I was working for a television yoke manufacturer, and I was in engineering at that time, and I saw the pictures of the troops moving in and capturing the Kotel. I broke down in tears, and I had to hide my face from the workers there, so I went into a corner until I was able to dry my eyes. Yeah, that was I won't forget it.
Over the years, I imagine there have been many reunions of some of the Machalniks, and anything strike you out of any of the people who were with you at the time, or that you met through your activities and volunteering?
Unfortunately, I was, shall I say, in a sheltered group where I didn't really associate with Machalniks because there were only 6 of us on duty there, and I was the only American Machalnik. There was a fellow from France, a fellow Max Schneider. He was there, and the others were Israelis. I did have a situation where, again, somebody shook my hand. I don't remember exactly what the incident was, to give me a yasher koach for what I did. And I said, hey, I did what every Jew is supposed to do. There's no question about it. And I don't deserve any special credit. It's just that some of us had the courage of our conviction, that's all.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir, my pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.